Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to talk about what an ANA is, or an ANA test. I am compiling a playlist about stiff person syndrome in light of Celine Dion's recent diagnosis. And I'm starting to notice that there are a lot of different components about or that pertain to getting diagnosed with a condition like SPS that I haven't talked about. I have talked about my own SPS diagnosis and my journey towards that. But as people start, Googling the condition or, looking up information about it, there's going to be a lot of different parts to it. And so an ANA may be one part of it, but an ANA is also just in general a part of having an autoimmune illness. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. So when a doctor suspects that you might have an autoimmune illness, typically you go to a rheumatologist or you're referred to a rheumatologist. And one of the sort of, I guess, baseline tests that they will run is an ANA. They do run a lot of other stuff. I actually saw a rheumatologist recently and she ran, everything on the planet, but an ANA test was on there. And I will do a separate video discussing my own journey with my ANA test, because there have been some changes and some things that have happened recently that I don't know, it might be good, it might be bad, I don't know, but I think that it's important for me to follow up this video with another one with my own personal experience. So what is an ANA? An ANA is an anti-nuclear antibody test. So basically it shows whether your own body is attacking your own healthy cells. So anti-nuclear, the reason it's called an anti-nuclear antibody test, and I've always wondered this too, because I actually didn't know why it was called that. I was like, what does this have to do with anything nuclear? It's called anti-nuclear because it targets the nucleus of your own cells, of your healthy cells. So obviously, what is it? The nucleus, that's, I guess, the powerhouse of the cell. Am I getting that right, or do I have it wrong? So obviously you're attacking the nucleus, you're really hitting it where it hurts, right? It's normal to have a few. So it's normal to have a few, anti-nuclear antibodies for any normal healthy person. It's when you have a large number that it becomes a problem and doctors will start to suspect that you have an autoimmune condition. So what are the most common conditions tested for? And when I went to the rheumatologist recently, she was like, look, I check for this, and this. It's literally like a set of like 4 or 5 conditions. And she's just like, that's what I do. Which seems odd to me because, stiff person syndrome, although it is rare, can also cause you to have, a positive ANA. So the most common conditions tested for with an ANA are lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, scleroderma, Sjogren's, and Addison's disease. I don't know what Addison's disease is. Oh, and autoimmune hepatitis. I don't know what Addison's is. I am familiar with most of the other ones. Scleroderma, not really, but the other ones I have some familiarity with. So symptoms that may cause. So how does a doctor get to that? Come to that conclusion? How do you get referred to the rheumatologist, and what does a rheumatologist look at that makes them suspect, like, oh, I gotta run an ANA because it sounds like an autoimmune illness? And pay close attention to this symptom profile. If you have a fever, if you have a rash, if you have fatigue, if you have joint pain, stiffness, or swelling, if you have muscle pain, does that sound familiar? When I started reading these symptoms, the first thing that came to mind was Lyme disease. And I was like, that's like typical, your typical I want to say run of the mill, but I guess Lyme disease isn't really run of the mill, but that's like your typical Lyme disease case. So it was just really weird for me to read that and to just be like, that is so bizarre to me. Like, I guess there are a lot of autoimmune conditions that also have those same symptoms, rheumatoid arthritis, fatigue, joint pain, and stiffness, right? Stiff person syndrome, muscle stiffness. I think it can also have fatigue, anxiety, things like that. But a rash, a rash and a fever is like a telltale sign of Lyme disease. So that was very interesting to me as I was reading that. So once they see that, that you're having those types of symptoms or something in that wheelhouse, they will, they'll test you for an ANA to see if you've got a positive there. And they, an ANA cannot diagnose a specific disease. That's the one thing about an ANA is that it's just kind of like a general, like I said, it's your first line test. Like, let's see if you've got this thing. Let's see if you've got something. That's probably more appropriate. But it's, if it comes back positive, the doctor's not going to be like, oh, you have rheumatoid arthritis. Obviously, they will look at your symptoms. If you have joint pain and stiffness like in your hands, then that would probably be like, oh, you probably have rheumatoid arthritis. But they do start checking other things alongside the ANA. For example, when I had the test run, it was like a bunch of stuff that they will check for celiac. I think she had celiac on there. She had some other like clotting disorder to test for that on there, lupus, things like that. So there are other more specific antibodies that they will test for. So when it comes to something like stiff person syndrome, I did show, I had a positive ANA. And actually recently when I saw my rheumatologist, this most recent rheumatologist, she told me that the way that my ANA looked was typical of lupus. And I was like, that's weird because the previous rheumatologist years ago that saw that same test told me it was psychosocial. And I do have a video on that. It's called like the worst doctors ever or something like that. And she said, I think it's strange that he would tell you that because this is typical for lupus. I guess the way that, because there's more to it. I'm just kind of giving you a general understanding, but there's more to it. There are more specific things written on the test. And I guess when she looked at it, she was like, yeah, it looks kind of like, typical lupus type of situation on there. So it was really weird to her that a doctor would tell me, it's psychosocial. But when you're getting diagnosed for something specific, so the ANA is first thing, and then they'll start testing you for other things. A rheumatologist is going to test you for those conditions I listed, lupus, RA, Sjogren's, those types of things. A neurologist was who I was referred to, and I guess because SPS is a neuromuscular condition, then, they send you out to a neurologist. I think it's very odd, given the fact that it is an autoimmune illness. I think it's odd that rheumatologists don't have at least some kind of a working knowledge or a familiarity that there are other things. Because I know that list, those aren't the only autoimmune illnesses that exist on this planet. For example, multiple sclerosis. Why would you not test for that? But anyways, I guess it just depends on how they manifest. Multiple sclerosis is also a nervous system illness. So I guess that's, neurology. So I don't really know how doctors determine like how to classify it or which specialist is going to take care of what. But when it comes to SPS, you're going to be sent to a neurologist. So the more specific antibodies, like I said, there is a lupus panel that they run, and they'll test you specifically for other lupus autoimmune markers. For SPS, it's a GAD65. I do have a video on GAD65 antibodies. That's going to be in my stiff person syndrome playlist. Now, I also just recently did another video on something known as paraneoplastic stiff person syndrome that will also be on the playlist. And there is a different antibody for the paraneoplastic version of stiff person syndrome, which is called amphiphysin antibody. So once they kind of see here's this ANA situation going, they will start testing you for other things, for more specific antibodies to identify the specific autoimmune illness that you have. So just because you have a positive ANA does not, they can't identify specifically what you have. Also, what she told me was that you can have a positive ANA but no autoimmune illness. I believe she told me that. And on the reverse side, I recently read that you can not have an ANA and still have an autoimmune illness. So I thought that was very interesting as well. In case you are out there trying to get diagnosed for something, you can not have a positive ANA and still have an autoimmune illness. So I guess that's where those more specific antibodies would be helpful. So negative test for an ANA, a negative ANA, does not rule out an autoimmune illness. So just know that. Also, you could have a positive ANA as a result of a viral infection. You could also have a positive ANA as a result of cancer. So those two things can also trigger a positive ANA, which is very interesting to me because it could be anything. The viral infection one was very interesting to me, but I might have to talk about that in a separate video because that kind of stood out to me, particularly for those of us that have or that have been diagnosed with Lyme disease or Epstein-Barr, that kind of thing. And as we know, those two, particularly Epstein-Barr, has been linked a lot to autoimmune illnesses, particularly I think multiple sclerosis. So there's just so much. I'm learning a lot. As I'm doing these videos, I'm also learning a lot. And you can also have an ANA with SPS. I did read and I did verify that you can have a positive ANA with stiff person syndrome. And I think that is the way that my doctor at UCLA was able to diagnose me, because I did not have a positive GAD65 test, which is typically what is used to diagnose stiff person syndrome. So I wanted to just do this quick sort of primer. You know what? I think I will add it to my stiff person syndrome playlist because it does pertain to that. And a lot of people I think are going to be curious as to, maybe how SPS is diagnosed. And there are outliers like myself that did not have the GAD65 antibodies, but responded to, the medication that is specific for SPS. And I did have that positive ANA, which I will talk more about in another video. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one.